realized that those characteristics are everywhere in leaders, in people who are curious, in inventors, in innovators. Well, I think about the Wright brothers, for example, who obviously didn't think that only birds could fly, that it must have been the wings. But then the more they studied different birds, the more they realized that the wings had a remarkable variety, so it wasn't that. But then they kept going back and they kept going back. And the same stories are told about the light bulb guy.
Thomas Edison.
Yeah, he was just, people mocked him for having failed so many times in his attempt to create a light bulb. And his reply was that he hadn't failed that many times. He had discovered that many ways to do it wrong. So the thing about the trickster character, flexibility, imagination, and courage, is they keep at it. And so being ready for that not knowing is pretty scary. And being nimble and kind of cheeky and playful and comic and looking for other ways that other critters or other people are doing that is very comforting.
Absolutely. And getting comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah.
Whereas so much of our programming has been about get the answer, get it right. There's only one answer. And you don't know it. And I do. And so I have power over you.
And
And wait a second.
if you have power, your answer is right and mine is wrong. So the power disables the child's capacity to explore. What I ask people to do is to use the physical environment wherever they are to move in different ways, to move at different paces, to move backwards, to move on their toes, so that they relate to the world differently. And I tried it out, but when I was just putting the course together for the first time, I tried a number of different things, and one was to slow down. So I measured the time from the parkade to my office on the campus, and then I doubled it, and I tried to do the walking from where I was to my office at half the pace, so that I could really be going very slowly. And I heard things that I didn't typically hear. I heard birds. I actually heard leaves. I heard laughter, but I didn't see any people that would go with that laughter, so it must have been some distance away. So I realized that my relationship with the lived environment was in part foreclosed because I was always end gaining. I was always, I got to be there.
Mhm.
You got to be there. You got to be here. I had had several academic positions in institutions, in leadership positions, where I was hired into the position largely because I kind of rocked the interview. People thought I was quite creative and imaginative, and I would get hired, and then I wouldn't be allowed to do any of those things because the pattern of the institution was already established. No, we don't do it that way here. I said, well, but I'm here now. Let's give it a try.
Elaine Decker, it's such a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. And you and I have known each other for, I don't know, a decade plus, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful because you're a person you're wicked smart. And so many ways in which you bring humor into everyday understandings and the appreciation for who we are as human beings. And just to give people a sense of a little bit of your background, that I know you have a PhD from the University of British Columbia that you earned back in 2004.
Correct.
And that when you pursued this PhD, you chose a study that not everybody chooses, right? It was the study of comedy and the interpretive work of being human. It's like, right, okay, how does comedy support us in being humans? And then you have over a 50-year career in various forms of teaching in elementary schools, colleges. You've been in service education, community organizations, and and you've held several administrative posts in education, which you said all provided grist for the comedy, right? The comedy. And I also want to note that you're an active climate activist and that you're very concerned about how we as humans can be more awake and fulfill our relationship to each other and to the earth. And somehow or another, comedy weaves into all of that. So I think you said that there's an advice that you follow, a Conrad Hires back in 1981. He said something like the task of clowns and fools
Yes.
and comic heroes to remind us of our intrinsic freedom and flexibility. So I
Yes.
think we need that Freedom
Yes,
and flexibility. Elaine, welcome. We're grateful to have you with us today.
yes, the Conrad Heyer's work was very important. He distilled for me the three qualities of the trickster character, which are flexibility, imagination, and courage. And if you think about those three in any kind of work that you do, serious or funny or difficult or just joyful, they all come to play. And the more I realized that that wrapped around the trickster character, I realized that those characteristics are everywhere in leaders, in people who are curious, in inventors, in innovators, in caretakers, in people who look after circumstance, look after vulnerabilities, and people who have, well, I think about the Wright brothers, for example, who obviously didn't think that only birds could fly.
Right.
Must have spent some time watching birds and wondering what it was about birds that made them able to fly, that made people not able to fly. So in their early days, they thought that the flying, that the takeoff in particular, I don't know the science of this. This is the Saturday afternoon understanding of the Wright brothers, that it must have been the wings. But then the more they studied different birds, the more they realized that the wings had a remarkable variety, so it wasn't that. But then they kept going back and they kept going back. And the same stories are told about the light bulb guy. What was his name?
Thomas Edison.
Yeah, he was just people mocked him for having failed so many times in his attempt to create a light bulb. And his reply was that he hadn't failed that many times. He had discovered that many ways to do it wrong.
Right, exactly.
So the thing about the trickster character, flexibility, imagination, and courage, is they keep at it over and over and over again, and they show up everywhere.
So thank you, everyone who's listening right now. I just want to take a minute because, Elaine is one of our advocates for living the potential. And we are an intergenerational learning community. And you're probably listening to us on a YouTube channel, or perhaps you've logged into our Bridging the Potential podcast. In either case, we'd love you to become a member of Living the Potential. So you can go to www.livingthepotential.com. And also, you can hit the subscribe button on this podcast. Because you know what they say, the more people who are subscribing, the more flexibility, imagination, and courage you have. Right, Elaine?
Yeah, you got it. Where I eventually decided I could do this as an academic work was reading a book by a woman named Beatrice Otto, Otto.
Mhm.
She's a historian. She,
Right.
she wrote a book called Fools Are Everywhere. And she documented the trickster or fool persona in societies around the world, in indigenous cultures, ancient historical monarchies, Shakespeare's plays, psychological archetypes, science fiction imaginaries, and books for and by children. They appear in art, song, game, magic, danger, dreams, and rescue missions. They're camouflaged by ordinary folks, but available when beckoned. So the universality of this archetype really seemed like it was worth investigating to see what it would offer to broaden education's capacity to bring everyone into their fullness, as
Right.
opposed to teaching a common concept in a common way as though the people were common. And so,
Right, exactly. Well, I'm just curious, back in the day, back in 2004, when you were, working on your PhD and your dissertation, and you brought this topic up, was there any pushback from the experts in higher echelon of education?
well, not at that time. There had been earlier. I had had several uh, academic positions in institutions, in leadership positions, where I was hired into the position largely because I kind of rocked the interview. People thought I was quite creative and imaginative, and I would get hired, and then I wouldn't be allowed to do any of those things because the pattern of the institution was already established. No, we don't do it that way here. I said, well, but I'm here now. Let's give it a try. So at the time that I thought to do the doctoral work, I was working in an administrative role at UBC, and that's when I met Florette, actually. She was a traveling teacher, and our office ran all the work of traveling educators around the province on behalf of the university. And we became friends, as did everyone in our little unit. And I was studying the qualities of powerful continuing education. And it was boring as the day is long, but it was kind of the work that we were doing. So I thought, well, here's the data. And I'm trying to think what the pivotal thing was. Probably a book that I read, or a film that I went to, or a nighttime show. And I just got hooked on this idea of laughter and comedy. And my doctoral advisor was in England at the time. And I wrote to him and said, if I change my topic from continuing education as a force for influence to studying comedy, would you stay on as my advisor?
Oh
And
yeah, let me see how those are connected, right?
he wrote back and he said, I don't know anything about comedy. You study comedy and I'll take care of the university. And so that's what we did. I pursued every avenue that I could find for the documentation of the comic spirit that Hires writes about. And it wasn't difficult. It's just that we don't look there because we think it's not serious.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that you say, lessening the grip of conventional ideas, you call it, was to prevent what you call the hardening of the categories.
It's true.
So, that's like, okay, a little metaphor and hardening of the arteries, right? The categories, because what? People are in their little tracks, their domains, and it's like, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And then you show up and go, well, maybe it isn't. Let's turn it upside down and inside out. So you probably had quite an experience working with people who were conventional,
Yeah.
dealing with the hardening of the categories, and how did you maneuver around that?
Well, one thing about the university is once you're in the pathway, they assume that you earned the price of admission,
Hmm.
and so they give you some space. And so uh, research at universities is done by everyone all the time, and that's kind of the currency. So you're expected in some cases, to take an idea and examine it again in several ways to confirm the thesis, or you take an idea and you examine it in a number of ways to prove that that ain't the thesis, or that the
Right,
thesis doesn't
right,
hold water.
right,
I was
right,
more in that latter side of things to show that laughter is not the opposite of seriousness, and comedy is not the opposite of seriousness. And so I looked for authentic scholars of various kinds who were doing deeply philosophical work. And that's how I ended up with Hans-Georg Gadamer, a philosophical Eastern European in the early stages of modernity. And David, my advisor, just kills himself laughing because he says, it just was the greatest irony that I would end up attaching, like as a rabid feminist, I would end up attaching my doctoral work to the work of an old white Eastern European. But Gadamer re-examined hermeneutics, which is the word basically means making meaning. And he brought that into the day-to-day life of being human. We're always making meaning. We're always examining, not with a microscope or an intention, but so for example, when we decide what to put on of our clothing of the day, the first thought is, well, what do I have to do? If I don't have to go out, I could stay in my jammies for the day. If I'm going to stay in my jammies, it's a little cold, so I'll put on a sweater. If I'm going to go downstairs to take out the garbage, I don't want to go out in my pajamas, so I'll put on my coat. Or so,
hmm
so the judgment that's made about being human is always situated. And Gadamer took the idea of making intellectual meaning into active situations. And he used the model of a game. So if you think about a soccer game, it has rules, it has a field, it has players, it has a time limit, it has an action of moving the soccer ball forward and back and getting it into a goal. It has a scoring routine, and it has competing groups of people called teams. But the outcome is never, if the game is fair and played according to the rules, the outcome is never predetermined.
right.
And Gadamer's point of view is every breath that a human takes is exactly that. It's a contextual experience, the outcome of which is not known. And so being ready for that not knowing is pretty scary. And being nimble and kind of cheeky and playful and comic and looking for other ways that other critters or other people are doing that is very comforting.
Absolutely. And getting comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah.
Whereas so much of our programming has been about get the answer, get it right. There's only one answer, and
Yeah.
you don't know it, and I do. And so
Right.
I have power over you.
And
And wait a second.
if you have power, your answer is right and mine is wrong. So the power disables the child's capacity to explore.
Exactly.
It's
Well, that's something
he's
that
already me.
happens, right? When you watch young little ones go from the awe and wonder of life and play. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that because the concept of we let go of what it means to be playful,
Hmm.
to explore and to be in the awe and wonder because we got to get it right.
Yeah,
And that's like steals our creativity right out of our system.
yeah,
And so bringing comedy and humor into the conversation, there's lots of times when people go, I don't get that. I don't, could you explain that joke to me?
yeah,
And you have analyzed, kind of like created the zipper joke, I think is what you called it. So let's talk a little bit about that because really dissecting into humor and comedy from a philosophical approach, the way you just described it, it doesn't seem like, I don't know if all the comedians that we're watching today have ever done that. But you have, and I can see you, and we are going to talk about how the trickster comes to life in your world and in courses and programs like that. So people that if you're listening to this podcast, hang in here because you can bring that trickster into your life in ways that Elaine will make it very simple. You're probably already doing it and not even aware of it.
yeah.
So should we talk about the zipper joke now?
Sure, we could. I just by way of staying on the course of me not having invented this, but rather having found people who studied different fields, not teaching necessarily, which is my field of work, and not in the education frame, but came to the same conclusion. So I mentioned Beatrice Otto, who's a historian. She says she's documented the trickster or fool persona in science societies around the world. Clowns and sages are found in indigenous cultures, ancient historical monarchies, Shakespeare's plays, psychological archetypes, science fiction, imaginaries, and books for and by children. They appear in art, song, game, magic, danger, dreams, and rescue missions. They are camouflaged by ordinary folk, but available when beckoned.
Absolutely.
The thing about praying to a god or a spirit or an ancestor to obtain some wisdom, or moving into a meditative state to allow a visitation by a non flesh character, a second voice, as it were, are all ways to come in contact with your trickster. When you move into 21st century or 20th century, I guess it would be analysis of the personality, the Jungian archetypes include several examples of the trickster character.
Right.
If we move over into the religious field, Cecil Collins, I don't know his religious background, but his book, which is lovely, is called The Vision of the Fool. And he writes that the saint, the artist, the poet, and the fool are one. They are the eternal virginity of spirit, which in the dark winter of the world continues to proclaim the existence of a new life, gives faithful the promise of the spring of an invisible kingdom and the coming of light.
Wow.
And then in current modernity, like right now, this year, Colombian American anthropologist Arturo Escobar, who's a design
Right.
guru,
Uh-huh.
his title, which Sandy and I use in our work when we do this, is Many Possibles Are Possible.
Yes. Yes.
So the whole idea of the playful, trickster, curious spirit with courage and imagination and flexibility isn't afraid to try it a different way. And so all of the teaching that I've done is to give people the right, the authority, the courage to do that.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
we play things for which the outcome never matters, and we'd be working away, beavering away in the class, and I'll interrupt them and say, "Wait a minute, I forgot to tell you something. None of this matters at all." And they go, "What?"
They're taking notes furiously and you go, no, that's not what's important here. It gets their attention, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an upside down, inside out universe. And I was thinking about the magician and the maverick. And,
Hmm.
I know I have some maverick tendencies because I'm kind of a disruptor
Uh-huh.
in really creating this space of intergenerational learning and that people younger can actually have more wisdom than people that are older. And it's kind of like, well, how's that even possible?
Yeah.
Well, they have it inside of them and they weren't
Right.
schooled out of it yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's the whole idea of the rules of the game and being a disruptor.
Mhm.
and not, kind of saying the elephant in the room, like some of these sayings,
Absolutely,
you know.
absolutely.
So back to
So
the zipper joke.
you mentioned the zipper joke. That's the practice for that. The zipper joke is a structured joke. And in order to, and so there's an input, there's a punchline, and there's an outcome. And you can change any of those things and it affects the others. Now, that would be the same philosophical uh, statement that a Buddhist would say to you that you can never step in the same river twice, because as soon
Right,
as you step in that water and lift your foot, the river has moved. So in the beginning, dealing with students, the younger the student, the more comic they are, the more easily comic.
right,
The older they
exactly.
get, and the higher the degree that they're seeking, and the general snobbiness of the institution where they're working. Like I've taught at trade schools and industrial colleges and secondary schools and um, elementary schools. the 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 ones who struggle the most with comedy are the ones who are trying to get a PhD from the University of British Columbia, because they're really trying to not expand their own thinking, which is what we would hope learning would be about, or
Right,
expand
right,
their worldview or their way to participate. They're trying to obtain something. They're in a transaction. They wanted that degree for some reason.
right,
And so they miss the joy of the explore. They're
right.
so busy of getting to Oz that they forget that they could run through the garden on the
Right.
way there.
Although they're also feeling like I don't want to look like a fool, whereas what you're saying, hey, the fool has the
Bring it
power. The
on.
fool has the power. Don't be afraid, to be all out, and it's kind of like it seems like people as they get older, they're more concerned about what other people think. And like you said, so many of the people that you've worked with, they go, I can't dance, I can't sing, I can't draw,
Yeah,
and I'm not funny,
yeah.
So what's the transformation that occurs with being in your presence, let's say in a course, where people shift from that belief to some other way of seeing themselves?
Well, we play all the time. We do various things. I make sure that in any activity that I give them, there's insufficient time to complete the work. So they always have to just go as they can. I'll tell you a little bit about you. You're familiar with the Rube Goldberg machine?
No.
No? Okay. Well, Rube Goldberg was an American cartoonist. He worked for the San Francisco paper, and he was really concerned at the turn of whatever, I guess the turn of the century, at the automation of things. He thought that took human interaction out of the engagement. So he created the most ridiculous, complex ways to do simple things by creating machines to do things that humans could do just fine on their own. And
Uh-huh.
he drew cartoons of them. So you could look him up. RUBE is his name, Goldberg, and he created things that became known as Rube Goldberg machines, which are ridiculous combinations of things that come together to create a machine to do something. So one of the first ones that he drew was a machine that would wipe his mouth after he'd taken a spoon of soup. So he'd take a spoon of soup and the machine would come over and wipe his mouth. Well, that idea caught on in a big way as people became more and more nervous about automation as a way of removing
Oh
human
yeah. Yeah.
uh, intuition or interaction. And eventually, I don't know how long it took, but eventually the engineering faculties at major US universities introduced something called a Rube Goldberg competition, where groups of engineers were required to do a simple task, creating the most complex machine that they possibly could from ordinary household objects. And it's still running. Been running now for many, many years. And so one would be removing the battery from a, a what do you call it? A light, a handheld light. Um,
Flashlight.
Yeah, a flashlight and putting in a new battery, but the machine had to do that. So they invent all these contraptions. They had to go scouring around finding materials and all that sort of stuff. And I did that when I worked at BCIT. I used that strategy, and one pair of two young men invented a machine that would raise the door of the garage with the remote control and water the two uh, plants that were outside the door that the boy's mother had said, please water the plants while I'm gone. So they invented this machine and then they got somebody else to video it. And they sat in Adirondack chairs in the garage and the door went up and they're sitting there drinking beer out of a can and the machine waters the two plants. Well, that effort, so this was a 15-week class, 3 hours a week. So what's that, 45 hours? It took them about 4 full days, like maybe 80 hours to create this idea and to put together the mechanisms to do this thing.
Wow.
And I said to them, would you do it again? They said, of course not. Why would we do it again? I said, well, why did you do it now? He said, well, we got started. We weren't going to be defeated. We knew it was a good idea. We saw all those other machines that because we would look at examples,
Right.
on the internet and various things. So that idea of getting started with something and then falling in love with it and deciding to pursue it regardless of what it had to do with anything.
Right.
Obviously, his mother was going to be pleased that he did water the plant.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Well,
but
that,
nowadays, without having the facility, because that was at working at a trade school, so there were a lot of mechanical opportunities available, and many of the students in those classes were taking other classes, and they would enjoy the support of the carpentry department or whatever to draw
mhm,
materials and stuff. But now we do it by drawing. So I ask people to bring to write 5 words on 5 different pieces of paper of ordinary household objects and bring them to the class. So we have this pot full of things, and then every team draws 5 or 6 out of that, and they have to create with a drawing a machine that will do a task that I give them. So I think the last task that I used was to turn off the light switch on the wall in the kitchen, just
mhm,
inside the door, turn the light
mhm,
off, and they have 5 or 6 things that they're able to use. And so they use as the engineers would have used and as anyone would use the basic principles of science, the inclined plane, the lever and pulley, the use of gravity, uh,
mhm,
movement over time. And if you look up on the internet, there's probably a 6 minute long video of a modern group called OK Go, where
mhm,
they get a warehouse full of things and they break a grand piano and they have all kinds of basketballs and all sorts of things. There's also a TED talk that you can now see where an engineer explains how to build a Rube Goldberg machine, what things you need to do first,
mhm.
what things can wait till the end. So about the size of things, because it's trial and error and trial and error and trial and error, except that if you're an engineer, you have a sense of that. But the whole point is, if you're teaching grade 4 science and you're teaching the fundamentals of basic machines, it's as boring as the day is long.
Right.
If you're building a Rube Goldberg machine, people don't want to go home.
Right,
Well, it's not finished
exactly.
yet.
Exactly.
So it struck me that educationally, any way that we can reach down the throat of a learner and haul their heart up and say, play with this for a while is worth doing.
Yeah, I'm looking at that graphic just as you described it. Let's see. And that's just it because the imagination, like
Yes.
you're talking about the 3 things that are so important, the
Yeah.
flexibility,
Imagination,
imagination, and courage.
courage.
And there's something about and a lot of times I notice when I look for a picture for Elaine Decker, there's a little picture of Einstein.
Yes.
Like Einstein's part of your alter ego, because he said the imagination is more important than knowledge,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Because knowledge is a closed system, imagination is open-ended, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
you tell a story, I believe, in your dissertation about a gentleman that was in prison who was a musician that
Yes, he
was
was a
in.
musician.
So
Yes.
could you tell that story? Because I think that really illustrates the point about the power of imagination.
Yeah, I read that story somewhere. He was incarcerated for quite a long time, and when he came out, he was invited to play in a performance with an orchestra. I think he was a violinist, and the critics afterwards said that they were astonished at the quality of his play because they said he hasn't practiced for 8 years. So then they interviewed him. First, he'd had this performance; it was well received, and the critics who knew him well said not only was it good, but among the best. And they said to him, "How could you do that when you hadn't practiced for 8 years?" He said, I practiced every day for 8 years. I just didn't play an instrument.
Right.
So his preparation was all made within his his soul, his heart, his physical body, the way he might hold his shoulders. Do you know that the name Benjamin Zander used
Yeah.
to be that, yeah, of the orchestra, and he talks about two buttock playing, where little
Hmm.
beginning piano players play like this, and even their shoulders don't move, and then their shoulders start to move, and then they've been moving from one buttock to another on the, or they're just leaned to one way. And I was watching the other day with my younger son, and I love Benjamin Zander's presentations and his imagination and the way he invites people to bring their whole body to the instrument, not bringing the instrument to the band.
Right, right,
You
right,
bring yourself to the encounter and bring everything you've got.
right.
And so we were talking, we've always laughed about two buttock playing. And I watched a presentation the other day. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is my favorite. And I was watching it, I was doing something else. I was just watching it. I sat down for a minute, I started watching it. And all of these musicians are doing two buttock playing, regardless of their instrument. Now, I used to play the oboe. And so I always look for the oboist in the, some of them play the oboe quite stoically with the instrument down, but some of them play it almost like a cornet. And but they're all, when they're playing, their whole body, and I'm thinking all their blood vessels and everything are all in on the game. And that is what I would hope teaching would create for learners, an environment where everything they've got comes with them.
Right, exactly. The important thing is not the facts. It's like not memorizing or chronological dates and facts. It's about the discovery of why that's important and what experiments can you create. And I don't
Mhm.
think a lot of people have thought about how humor and comedy can be that bridge builder to help knowledge come alive, for learners of all ages. You
Well,
know,
it's ironic, really, because what you do if you're going to decide to be in this game is you give yourself permission to do it. So at first, people say, "Well, I'm not very funny." So you don't have to be funny. This isn't about being funny. It's about trying to figure out how humor works. And they
right.
gradually creep out of their shell to find ways to participate. And so that's why the zipper joke, you mentioned it earlier, is so useful because everyone can create their own joke from their own background knowledge, is what
Oh
Gadamer
yeah,
calls it.
yeah. Like do you want to give an example or two of a zipper joke?
Well, sure. The why did the chicken cross the road is a famous zipper joke,
Right.
which is a ridiculous question. Like, who cares? Do chickens cross roads? We have no idea. So right away, the stakes are down. There's no, you can't pass or fail chicken jokes. So chicken jokes are made up of a chicken and an action, which is straightforward, of chicken crossing the road. There's a suggestion that the chicken had something in mind. The only thing I can imagine the chicken would have in mind is that there's something to eat over there. There's
Yeah.
some green or something, and that's
Yeah,
why it's going to go.
exactly.
There's not any other
Exactly.
motivation. But the way the chicken joke is constructed is that the reason is told in the voice of another. And so the other imposes a reason on the chicken. Now, that's a typical educational relationship. The person with authority imposes a right
Yeah,
answer on the learner,
exactly.
right? We know that movie.
Right. Uh-huh.
You and I have been there. Well, this is a different one of those things. So let's say Colonel Sanders is the person answering, because this is pretty obvious. So if the question is, why did the chicken cross the road, is answered by Colonel Sanders, the answer is, it Sanders or Saunders? So
Sanders.
the answer is, did I miss one? So the Bill Clinton one, which is one that I always liked, was, why did the chicken cross the road? Answered by Bill Clinton was, I did not have sex with that chicken. So in order, first of all, to create the chicken joke, you have to have some stereotypical
Right. Right.
idea about the speaker, and then
Right.
you impose that idea on the joke. If the listener to the joke doesn't know who Bill Clinton is,
Right.
in fact, might have been Hillary Clinton, a response might be, I don't think that's funny. So there's no, it's a chicken joke is not necessarily funny. It is putting together two things that have no inherent relationship to create a third thing that may or may not be funny, but who cares anyway?
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's creative, it's curious insofar as you have to explore the background knowledge that you've been building for every day of your own life, and you bring it to every activity. That's another error that we make in in structured learning is we don't assume that our learners bring anything with them, but they always do.
Exactly,
They bring
exactly.
everything they've got. And we, if we invite everything they've got into the conversation, the whole process is richer and faster and more pleasant. And
Right. And there's something else that occurs I've noticed, and my experience is, I'm excited to take this course with you that we're going to be delivering on the network on the Trickster, but it's kind of like I did improv. Well,
oh,
it's
yeah.
table topics in the Toastmasters organization, which
Okay.
is a fabulous
Right.
learning to speak, but it's a leadership organization,
Yep.
really. And there's always a section where someone is leading table topics, and they give you the topic, and you have a minute or two to actually, you don't know what it is until they give it to you, and you have
Hmm.
to be in the moment. So
Hmm.
that takes courage. It
Yes.
also allows a deeper trust
Yep.
that I already know something that's relative to this, and I get to say it, even if I don't know for sure what's going to come out of my mouth,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and I've,
So that's the trifecta. You started with the most important one, which is courage. Flexibility would suggest I've got something. It doesn't exactly fit in this situation, but what the heck? I'll give it a try.
right,
And imagination, I'll fill in with something else.
right.
So one of the stories that is a true story that I've used to start some other conversations is a young man who was doing research at the university in Texas, in Waco, actually, in breast cancer, and they were studying breast cancer occurs in tubes that are the carrier of the milk in the female breast, and they had applied to have their research mounted to the U.S. Space Center because it's a zero gravity environment.
Wow.
Because in
Yeah.
their lab, they had to study the breast tube flattened in an agar situation, in a petri dish. But in the breast, it's like this. So
Right.
they're kind of intuiting how it might really work. So he was in the lineup waiting for his lunch in the deli and just standing there in the lineup. And he looks over and there's eggs for sale. And it occurred to him in that lineup that the egg yolk is suspended in the egg white in the shell of the egg, just as the breast tube would be the milk would be suspended in the tube, saved safe from harm by the flesh around that. And he wondered if they put their breast tubes in egg white solution, whether they would stay in their 3D form and they could study 3D experiences instead of flattened ones and then have to intuit what might have done otherwise.
Hmm.
Long story short, it worked. They didn't go to the space station. They saved $1 million and then some. And now he is the head of the lab that's named after him, the Benny Caparetto Lab in breast cancer research at the University of Texas in Waco.
Wow.
And they produced a sterile egg white equivalent solution to suspend 3D cells, not just for breast cancer research, but for all kinds of research that require the imitation of the real situation in the human body or in a plant. For example, if you wanted to
Hmm.
study a plant core and you didn't want to squash it flat, how would you hold it? And he's standing there waiting for his lunch.
Right.
I,
Exactly.
I could be waiting for my lunch for weeks and not think about it.
Right. So that's the imagination
Yeah,
at work. And when we're, outside of our normal environment, that's where nature comes in. I think I think ties into your passion for the environment and being a climate activist. It's like
right.
nature is teaching us all the time, and it's like hidden in plain sight, and we're
Yes,
missing it.
yes, yeah,
So somehow or another, the connection between what does nature have to teach us and getting out of our own way to,
yeah.
to see it, Do you have
So
an
it,
example
it
of
it's
that?
almost a contradictory set of actions. One is to liberate the individual to bring everything they've got. And one of the ways to do that is to make the outcome low stakes. Like, so you got six chicken jokes and you could only answer one, what we're going to fail you in comedy studies. Like there's nothing, you don't have anything to lose. So that's
Right.
one thing. The second is always work in groups because somebody always knows something. And typically somebody knows something you don't. And if you can develop a constructive, respectful relationship with the learners around you Everybody can do better. Four people can do eight people's worth of work if everybody's in the top of their game. If somebody's having a bad day, the other ones can hold the fort.
Right.
So when we're doing Rube Goldberg machines, we have these miscellaneous items that people have contributed, and you work with a team, and you've got a short amount of time, and you know it doesn't matter at all. So you just people just launch. They just get going because they're as surprised with the outcome as anyone who came to it. And so observers would say, Renee Beth, why did you do this? I don't know. The idea just came to me. That phrase is very common in creating Rube Goldberg machines. Students say, well, the idea just came to me. Well, it didn't, it came from you. It
Right.
came from whatever road you've traveled to get here on this
Right.
day.
Exactly. It came through you and we're
Yeah.
connected to everything,
Yeah.
that whole idea. So the conversation about out of all the choices of the trickster was the one that took primo position for you. In
Mhm.
this course that you've designed called the trickster, really you integrate lots of toys and experiments and fun activities for people that can kind of remember well, they access what they
Yes.
forgot
Yeah.
about their own awe and wonder, right?
Yes.
So, could you explain a little bit more about these three crucial qualities that are so important that you're talking about is like flexibility, courage, and imagination.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
woven into the course.
Yes.
And people start to discover new things about themselves that they didn't even know was possible. And they
That's
let
right.
go of those limiting beliefs that what are the limiting beliefs, Elaine, that the comedy with the trickster releases? What are those beliefs that go away and how do they perhaps never return? Those beliefs that I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, that all changes. Could you explain how that happens or maybe an example or two with people you work with?
Well, I think it happens because without thinking about whether or not they have these qualities, they immediately begin to use them. So on day one, let's take an example of people doing a graduate degree in educational leadership at the University of British Columbia, which is the unfunniest place in the entire world. They come in and they sit down very politely in their desks, in their desks. And then I disrupt them immediately and put them in groups of four according to my sets of lists. And so I would have lists of four things in an envelope. You take something out of the envelope and it has a word on it. Let's say it has rowboat. And you look at it as a rowboat. And I say, so there are groups of four all around this room. Find the people in your room and sit down together and introduce yourself. So someone would have rowboat, someone would have sailboat, someone would have paddleboard, and someone would have ocean liner. They don't know each other. They have these words and they have to cruise around like a cocktail party to say, what have you got? What have you got? And if they get very frustrated, I typically say, if you can't get anybody who wants to work with you because you can't find a commonality with any of these other things, go and stand over there in the corner because one group's going to be one person short and you're probably it. So they can hide out if they want, but they get into it right away. And I mean, these are just stupid, like four different kinds of screwdrivers, four types of ice cream topping, four seasons, four colors of leaves in the fall, just a word, and they have to find each other. So immediately they have to bring themselves and not bring themselves.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it's kind of a setup. Well, then the first thing we do is we play games and toys and with toys and things. They play for a while and they're chatting and laughing. And then I assign a leader for each group. And the first one, I usually use this as the first one. The first one is the leader with the shortest last name. So I said each group has a leader, and I know who that leader is. It's the person with the shortest last name, and they're already looking at me like, "Have you slipped a cog?" Well, so then that person as the leader gets particular assignments. Well, at one time, one person, this was at VCIT, so it was like 20 years ago. One young woman said, "That's prejudiced against Asians." I said, "I think you're right." And you're going to be here for 15 weeks. And by the end of the 15 weeks, I will have been prejudiced against everyone. So just wait your turn.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you did that on purpose. What's wrong with you? That's funny. Oh,
So they then come to rely on one another to fill in what they don't know. They
Right.
bring everything they've got and they're surprised because they actually don't bring everything they got. They bring some things that they think are suitable, but gradually as they work together, their colleagues or their playmates, if they're little people, draw it out of them. What else have you got?
Right.
What can you do
Exactly.
about so they
Exactly.
take so I give them a semi-structured activity, the outcome of which is really irrelevant. I give them some tools, I give them some companions, I give them an amount of time, and I go around and chat with people. And within 2 sessions of meeting, they're quite comfortable that they're going to do something that's really screwy, but they'll get over it. And I've
Right.
also
Exactly.
because they're in back to this example in particular, because they're in a graduate program at a snotty university, I said, don't tell any of these stories outside of the class, okay? Because people are going to say, you got a graduate degree for doing that? So what we do parkour around the campus. We look at parkour examples of skilled parkour people who are ones who have enormous confidence in and trust in the universe to
Could
protect.
you explain parkour, please?
Oh, it's called free running. It's usually done in the city and it's using the non-sidewalk movement spaces of the city to go where you're going. So people are doing handsprings off walls and jumping off um, street lamps and doing various other kinds of using the external physical environment in a magical way rather than in the way that the city might have designed it. So there's one fellow, Danny McGaskill, who does parkour on a bicycle. And I'll send you, just because you won't believe me when I tell you this, I'll send you a video of his. He's now a professional athlete doing this work. He rides his bike, a two-wheeler, over the top of a tennis net from one side of the tennis court. So these are courageous, these are the kind of people who climb mountains and do hang gliding and all kinds of that
Right.
sort of stuff. But what I ask people to do is to use the physical environment wherever they are in a classroom, on the campus, in the neighborhood, to move in different ways, to move at different paces, to move backwards, to move on their toes, so that they relate to the world differently. And I tried it out, but when I was just putting the course together for the first time, I tried a number of different things, and one was to slow down. So I measured the time from the parkade to my office on the campus, and then I doubled it, and I tried to do the walking from where I was to my office at half the pace, so that
Hmm.
I could really be going very slowly. And I heard things that I didn't typically hear. I heard birds. I actually heard leaves. I heard laughter, but I didn't see any people that would go with that laughter, so it must have been some distance away. So I realized that my relationship with the lived environment was in part foreclosed because I was always end gaining. I was always, I got to be there.
Hmm.
You got to be there. You got to be here.
Right.
But
Like learning to be in the
yeah,
moment, each breath, right?
while I was doing that, a number of people asked me if I was lost.
Right. You must be lost. You're turning in circles and you're looking in
Yeah,
all these
looking
directions,
up.
right?
Yeah, yeah. It's and so we learn from the Buddhists that being still is enormously rich, we have to stop the chatter. So I'm trying to remember her name, who wrote On Looking. Uh, a woman. She wrote her first book she wrote was about dogs, but anyway, she wrote this wonderful book called On Looking. And what she did was lived in an apartment in New York. She did a walk around the apartment building 11 times, and each time she went with a different expert. So she went one time with a person who was an expert with birds and another one who was an expert on plants. She went one time with a person who was blind. And every time she did that walk, she tried to use the other person as her guide and learn what she couldn't see or feel or hear or experience on her own,
Wow.
which
That's beautiful. That's a
which
great opportunity. It makes me want to do something like that for
yes.
sure.
So that really made me commit to all work in humor studies being done in a group
Yeah, yeah, I
because
hear you.
you,
I
you
hear
need
you.
you need all of those points of view in order to let go of Doris Lessing wrote the title of her book was Prisons We Choose to Live Inside. And
Mm,
I think that humor is the key to get you out of those prisons, but you have to practice it. You have to practice letting go and not being afraid. You can be embarrassed if you want, but you have to do it anyway. And
Hmm.
and if you're working with a group of people, well, kids are happy to do that. Adults are,
Yeah.
and
Right,
so they need to be supported to be the risk takers that they obviously.
right, right,
You don't get to
right,
graduate
right,
school at the University of British Columbia if you haven't accomplished a thing or two.
right.
They're not
Yeah.
doofuses or anything, but they tend to be
They're
more
con
orthodox than is necessary.
well, they've been conditioned to
Yeah,
pleasing people
yeah,
that have the power as if they have none.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
the distinction that you're making here in terms of remembering that you have core essence to bring forward and that you can have the courage when their environment is ripe, like the environments you're creating. And I just want to remind people, if you're listening to this, the event, the course that we're going to do with Elaine is going to be online. It's not going to be in person in the
Well, they'll
room
have to
like
go and
Disney.
run around their own neighborhood anyway.
Right. Right. And the idea is we can still do groups and breakout
Yes,
rooms
yeah,
and things like
yeah,
that. But the opportunity is to, the fool has the power.
yes.
It's kind of like, well, most people are afraid of looking like a fool, so that prevents them from using their imagination,
Exactly.
their courage, and being
Yep,
flexible, right?
yep.
So when you're rewarding people for being the fool, it's so amazing what can show up.
Yes, yeah,
So, that's one of the most important things is disrupting our attachment to looking good or getting it right
yeah,
and being open to trying something you've never done before and being surprised. Is that
yeah.
right?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of every class, I ask people to do notes to self, and the notes to self are what, so what, now what? And the what is, what did we do? So we built a Rube Goldberg machine. We had 5 people in our group. We decided we do this drawing and we used these following things. That's what happened. So what? Why does that matter? Well, I had to identify the parts of a machine, which I'd never thought about before. I teach secondary English. I don't think about parts of machines. And so what? The so what is, what are you going to do with this added point of view or this little window on something different? And many people have identified profound changes that they wish to make in their lives to be more joyful. Many people who are parents say, I'm going to spend more time with my children. That always makes me cry because they're busy people. They're working full time. They're school administrators. They're getting a graduate degree, and their children are home and they don't have time to play with them. And they say, when I have those experiences in the class, or if I read that when they're doing the what, so what, now what, I ask their permission not to give their name, but to say, someone pointed out that in this class, the homework is so heavy that they can't play with their children. I said, so your homework assignment tonight is you got to include your children in whatever homework you're doing,
Right.
and get them to play together kids invented let's pretend.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
adults give up on let's pretend pretty soon because they get orthodox and it has to be proven. But the kids have already proven it because they've already pretended.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
that that puts them back into not being childish, but being childlike,
Right,
being
exactly.
curious. And and
Absolutely.
and Florette used to tell a story of crouching down, and I can just imagine her doing it with her fat little legs, watching an ant carry things back and forth and wondering how the tiny ant could carry this heavy piece of grain that
Right,
she had. And you and I both know her and all the magic that she always understood.
right,
That being still and watching the ant,
right,
uh, you know,
right.
I think it's not my story. There was a teacher who had a little girl, probably in grade 2-ish, who didn't normally draw. She was at the back of the room, quiet kind of person. And the teacher asked, what are you drawing? And she said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, no one knows what God looks like. And the little girl said, well, they will in a minute.
Yeah, exactly. Out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah,
That's so
like
true.
they have just the complete trust that things will unfold in some way. They don't know what it is,
Right.
but they're ready for it. Now, some
That's
of the
right.
best critiques of what is come from children as well. My younger son used to play soccer, and you live on the West Coast. You play soccer always in the rain, and it's cold. And we have terrible soccer fields in Vancouver. There's puddles everywhere, so the balls are always doing backspins and spraying everybody. And they're wearing shorts. I have no idea why. They should be wearing parkas. Anyway, his coach was a yeller, and he'd go up and down the row after they've had their oranges. They're standing there and shivering. I'm in my car reading Margaret Atwood with the heater on, waiting for him to be finished. And the guy's going up and down and up and down. So my son came and got in the car and he said, and he would point his finger and yell at them. And my son said, Mom, if 1,000 times wouldn't work, why would 1,001?
Right,
Expression was,
exactly.
I've told you 1,000 times, I've told you 1,000 times.
Right.
I say, well, why don't you give up? That's a bad plan.
Right, exactly, exactly. Well, Elaine, having worked with people of all ages and this concept of being with the trickster and the three qualities of the trickster, we say is flexibility, imagination, and courage. And then somehow this you're dispelling the myth of separation, right? And you're strengthening people's capacity to celebrate their own gifts and challenges,
Mhm.
and like how to turn things around in a moment, even though you didn't know that was possible.
Yeah,
All of that, these are skills that people need more today than ever.
I agree.
So I want to make friends with the trickster. I want to learn about how the trickster can be with me this year in 2026, um, both individually for
Mhm.
myself and then collectively for our community. I'm so grateful that you're going to be teaching a course soon, at least one and maybe more than one. Do you want to describe just a little bit more about the course we're thinking about? It would be meeting like 2 hours a week for 4 weeks, and people will get a sense of the trickster, but then there's probably even more that we could do once we build on that.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and it will be online. And if you're listening to this podcast and you want to learn more, let us know because we're going to show you how you can learn more with Elaine Decker.
So
And the trickster. Anything, parting comments you'd like to add,
well,
Elaine?
we will get together in the timed items that you have available for us, and then in between, I will, and other individuals can do it as well. We'll decide what kinds of activities would people like to do to drill down a bit on that idea. If they wanted, if we do a Rube Goldberg design in a class and we talk about the physics of the six principles of physics, so what? People might find that really boring, but if they found it interesting, there's no reason why they couldn't go home and build their own Rube Goldberg machine.
Right, exactly,
So they can take
exactly.
it wherever they want. The parkour people, I give them some words that they can use like up and down and backwards and 1 foot and eyes closed, and you can go and do a parkour routine around your house. I always advise them to have a spotter. We had we had one group at the U, and they had the one of the words that they had in their envelope was up. They had one of their people standing on a fire hydrant, and the rest of the people were around in a sort of circle.
Right.
And uh, a prof stuck his head out of the second story window of the building adjacent and said, you there on the fire extinguisher, what are you doing? And the person said, I'm standing on the fire extinguisher. The guy said, well, what if there's a fire? And the person on the fire, on the standing on the fire hydrant said, I think I'd hear the truck coming. Like the panic in this guy, the single utility of a fire hydrant was to be always a vacant spot for when there might be a fire,
Right.
without all kinds of other things. That might be a place where butterflies needed to mate, or where
Okay, well,
someone
ask a
might,
dog.
yeah,
It's gonna ask a dog.
exactly. Exactly. So
Well,
there would be lots of ways to take the ideas of tricksters throughout the world. We look at ancient, like celestial navigation, we look at nonverbal communication, we look at parkour and rolling around and using words of movement. We look at what used to be called origami or paper folding is now called paper engineering because the computers have entered the field and now it's now explosions. The the titans of that field create paper engineering books that sell for hundreds of dollars.
right. I hear
Uh,
you. I hear
and
you.
so I think it's my job in the class to say, first of all, if you come to this class, you've already self-identified because you've accepted courage. Because ordinary scaredy cats don't come. They think, oh, I don't want to do that. I'm not funny. Um, and so that means that you're courageous. And probably you imagine something would happen and something will happen. And it will partly happen because I will suggest things and provide ideas that have worked, but there's a whole lot more ideas I haven't tried yet. So you have to bring some of those, and that's part of the imagination. What can you do with what I bring? What can I learn from what you bring?
Right, exactly.
And
And
how can we
yeah,
work together to
right,
more better ideas? This
right,
planet needs us in a big way. We're
right.
not, we're doing
Totally.
a lot of
Yeah,
things wrong.
right.
So let's take every opportunity to scratch each other's heads in ways that we haven't done before,
Perfect.
and
Yeah.
uh, and enjoy the doing of it.
Absolutely. For this is for moms, for dads, for
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, for grandmas,
Yep.
grandpas. For entrepreneurs, I heard the other day on, I think it was NPR, that was saying that in the workspaces, where people are sharing ideas for getting the next job,
Mhm.
they're all practicing improv now because that's a fun thing to do and how to
Yes.
get to
Yep.
know each other and
Yep.
being in the moment and trusting.
Yep.
So I feel like doing this Trickster course with you, Elaine, it's going to empower people to show up more powerfully in their life
I
and
hope
have a
so.
lot of fun doing it and a
Yeah.
few laughs along the way. So thank you, Elaine Decker. I appreciate you so much. And stay tuned, people. You're going to want to be in this course. It's coming up soon. And we're going to make this year, we'll find the humor and
Yeah.
new possibilities through it
Absolutely.
all,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
spite of circumstances.
Yeah. We'll do Alberto Escobar's "Many possibles are possible."
Absolutely.
Anybody
Thanks
who says
again.
what's the right answer, you have to say, well, what was the question?
That's right. And the question is the most powerful thing. So thank you, everyone who's listening right now. I just want to take a minute because, Elaine is one of our advocates for living the potential. And we are an intergenerational learning community. And you're probably listening to us on a YouTube channel, or perhaps you've logged into our Bridging the Potential podcast. In either case, we'd love you to become a member of Living the Potential. You can go to www.livingthepotential.com. And also, you can hit the subscribe button on this podcast. Because you know what they say, the more people who are subscribing, the more flexibility, imagination, and courage you have. Right, Elaine?
Yeah, you got it.